Ryan Walker had always believed that a badge could shape the truth, and this morning he was about to learn that the truth never asks permission to be seen. Dawn settled over Ashcroft, Georgia, painting the police station in pale gold while the quiet hum of traffic drifted through streets that looked peaceful enough to hide every secret beneath them. Officers arrived carrying coffee, dispatch radios crackled with routine calls, and another ordinary shift seemed ready to begin, yet beneath the calm surface something invisible was already moving toward the station like a storm no forecast had predicted. Ryan adjusted the silver badge pin to his uniform and watched the front entrance with the confidence of someone who had spent years deciding who belonged and who did not. Around the department, people knew him as experienced, efficient, and impossible to challenge. Few questioned his decisions because questioning Ryan usually created problems no one wanted to inherit. He enjoyed that reputation. Power, after all, was easier to keep when everyone else preferred silence. At exactly 8:12 a.m., an unfamiliar sedan rolled into the visitor parking lot. The woman behind the wheel stepped out slowly, carrying a simple leather portfolio instead of a suitcase, dressed in a navy blazer, charcoal slacks, and polished shoes that reflected the morning sunlight. Her posture was calm, her expression unreadable, and her eyes quietly surveyed the building without a trace of nervousness. Her name was Naomi Brooks, though nobody standing outside the station recognized it yet. She had traveled nearly 300 miles before sunrise to reach Ashcroft, carrying official documents sealed inside the portfolio, but she moved with the patience of someone who never needed to announce her importance. Ryan noticed her almost immediately. His smile was slight, almost invisible, but it carried the unmistakable confidence of someone already forming an opinion before hearing a single word. As Naomi approached the entrance, Ryan stepped into her path with practiced authority. "Can I help you?" he asked, though his tone suggested the opposite. Naomi offered a polite smile. "I'm here for an appointment." Ryan glanced briefly at the portfolio before looking back at her face. Appointments usually involve checking in first. His words sounded professional enough for anyone listening nearby, but the message underneath them landed differently. Naomi nodded without argument. "That's understandable." Her calm response seemed to frustrate him more than any protest could have. Behind the reception desk, Officer Ethan Cruz looked up from his paperwork for only a second before returning to his computer, sensing the familiar rhythm of Ryan taking control of another encounter. Several civilians waiting for reports quietly observed the exchange without saying anything. Some shifted uncomfortably. Others looked away. The silence inside the lobby felt strangely heavy, as though everyone sensed a story beginning without knowing how it would end. Ryan folded his arms. "Mind if I take a quick look inside that portfolio?" Naomi maintained steady eye contact. "I'd prefer to wait until I'm checked in." The answer was respectful, measured, and completely reasonable, yet Ryan's expression hardened as though he had just heard a challenge. Somewhere deeper inside the station, a telephone rang repeatedly before stopping. A printer began producing several pages of paperwork. An unopened envelope stamped with the city seal rested on the chief's empty desk upstairs, waiting for someone to arrive. Outside, another vehicle quietly turned onto the street leading toward headquarters. No one in the lobby noticed it yet. Ryan certainly didn't. At that moment, he believed he was watching an outsider walk into his station. He had no idea that the woman standing calmly before him was walking into the department she had already been chosen to lead. Ryan let the silence stretch just long enough to make everyone in the lobby uncomfortable. He had learned years ago that hesitation often looked like guilt in the eyes of strangers, and he depended on that illusion more than most people realized. Naomi stood patiently with both hands resting lightly on the leather portfolio, never raising her voice, never shifting her posture, never allowing frustration to appear on her face. Her composure puzzled the receptionist, Officer Ethan Cruz, who quietly glanced toward the station clock before looking back at the computer screen where the morning schedule continued updating itself. A confidential calendar notification appeared briefly before disappearing again, unnoticed by everyone except Ethan, who assumed it belonged to the administrative staff. Ryan took another slow step forward. "You said you have an appointment," he said evenly. "Who are you meeting?" Naomi answered without hesitation. The person expecting me already knows I am here. Ryan gave a faint laugh that invited the nearby civilians to share the joke, although none of them did. That is not how this works. Naomi nodded politely. I understand your concern. Her calm reply somehow irritated him even more. People who challenged Ryan usually became emotional, defensive, or impatient. This woman did none of those things. Instead, she simply observed the station around her as if quietly memorizing every detail. She noticed the faded community bulletin board beside the entrance, the stack of outdated policy manuals behind the reception desk, the cracked frame holding the department's mission statement, and the framed photographs of officers receiving awards over the past decade. She also noticed something less visible. Several employees avoided making eye contact whenever Ryan spoke. Their silence carried the weight of experience rather than respect. Upstairs, Chief Harold Simmons hurried through his office searching for a sealed appointment packet that had been delivered before sunrise. His assistant informed him that the welcoming committee had already left to coordinate the arrival of the department's newest commanding officer after an unexpected schedule adjustment. Harold checked his watch. She should already be here, he muttered before reaching for his phone. Downstairs, Ryan folded his arms again. Until someone confirms your story, you are staying right here. Naomi answered with the same measured confidence. That will not be a problem. Ethan quietly looked toward her portfolio once more. A small metallic emblem was partially visible beneath the leather flap, but before he could study it more closely, Ryan stepped between them, blocking his view. Outside, a black city vehicle turned into the parking lot before slowing almost to a stop. The driver checked a message, circled the block, and continued waiting for final instructions. Inside the station, another telephone began ringing. Ryan ignored it. Then his own department radio crackled with a brief transmission requesting that all supervisors remain available for an important administrative announcement expected within the hour. Ryan barely listened. His attention remained fixed on Naomi. He believed he was controlling the situation one careful decision at a time. What he failed to notice was that every passing minute moved the department closer to a moment that could never be undone. Naomi understood that better than anyone. She had accepted this assignment knowing she would inherit more than a new office. She would inherit broken trust, quiet fear, and a culture that had allowed confidence to replace accountability. Looking around the lobby one more time, she took a slow breath and waited, knowing that sometimes the strongest person in the room was not the one asking the questions but the one willing to let the truth arrive on its own schedule. Ryan glanced toward the evidence room before returning his attention to Naomi, and in that instant an idea quietly formed in his mind. It was the kind of decision that appeared harmless on the surface yet carried consequences far beyond what anyone standing in the lobby could imagine. He turned toward Ethan with the confidence of someone who expected immediate obedience. Cover the front desk for a minute, he said before disappearing down the hallway. Ethan hesitated, sensing that something felt unusual, but he simply nodded. Naomi remained exactly where she was, her expression calm as she watched officers move from one office to another carrying reports, folders, and steaming paper cups of coffee. The station looked like any other police department beginning a busy Tuesday morning, yet beneath the ordinary routine tiny cracks were beginning to show. Two detectives quietly exchanged concerned glances after noticing Ryan walking toward the restricted records area without explaining why. A civilian clerk paused while organizing personnel files, then slowly returned to work without asking questions. The habit of remaining silent had become almost automatic inside the building. A few moments later Ryan returned carrying a plain manila folder tucked beneath one arm. His face revealed nothing except professional confidence. "Since you claim you are here for official business," he said, "there are a few standard procedures we need to complete." Naomi looked at him with the same quiet patience she had shown since arriving. "If they are legitimate procedures, I will gladly cooperate." Ryan almost smiled. Those words were exactly what he wanted to hear. He placed the folder on the reception counter and opened it carefully, allowing several documents to become visible without fully revealing them. From a distance they appeared official enough to discourage questions from anyone nearby. Ethan noticed that one page had not been logged into the records system earlier that morning, but before he could say anything, Ryan closed the folder again. "Please set your portfolio on the counter," Ryan instructed. Naomi complied without hesitation, gently placing the leather case where he indicated. She folded her hands in front of her and waited. There was no fear in her eyes, only patience. That composure unsettled Ryan more than he cared to admit. He had expected resistance, confusion, perhaps even frustration. Instead, he found himself facing someone who seemed entirely comfortable allowing events to unfold at their own pace. Upstairs, Chief Harold Simmons tried calling the front desk once again. The line rang unanswered before automatically forwarding to voicemail. He frowned, collected the sealed appointment packet bearing the city's official crest, and hurried toward the stairwell. At nearly the same moment, a convoy of municipal vehicles entered the government complex less than half a mile away after being briefly delayed by a railroad crossing. Their arrival was now only minutes away. Downstairs, Ryan carefully reached toward Naomi's portfolio. "For security purposes," he said, "I need to inspect the contents." Naomi met his eyes without blinking. "You may inspect it in accordance with department policy." Her answer was simple, yet the final four words lingered in the air. "In accordance with department policy." Ethan noticed Ryan pause for the briefest moment before continuing. The lobby grew strangely quiet. Even the conversations among waiting visitors faded into whispers. Somewhere beyond the front windows, sunlight reflected across the polished hood of a black government sedan turning slowly into the station parking lot. No one inside seemed to notice. Ryan believed everything remained under his control. Naomi already knew that the next few minutes would reveal which people respected authority and which people respected only the appearance of it. Ryan released the latch on Naomi's portfolio with deliberate care, making certain everyone in the lobby could see what he was doing. The room had grown unusually quiet. Even the dispatcher speaking into her headset lowered her voice as curious eyes drifted toward the reception counter. Naomi stood motionless, her hands resting calmly at her sides, watching every movement without interruption. Ryan slowly lifted the top compartment and sorted through neatly organized documents, a leather notebook, and several sealed envelopes bearing official markings that he barely glanced at before setting them aside. Then, almost imperceptibly, his right hand slipped toward the inside pocket of his own uniform. Ethan noticed the movement but could not clearly see what Ryan was doing from behind the counter. A second later, Ryan leaned slightly over the open portfolio as though adjusting the papers. When he straightened again, his expression changed. His eyebrows narrowed, his breathing slowed, and a look of manufactured surprise settled across his face. "Well," he said loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear, "that is interesting." Several people instinctively moved closer. Ryan reached into the portfolio and withdrew a small evidence envelope stamped with the department's restricted records label. He held it between two fingers so the waiting civilians, officers, and clerical staff could all see it. "Would you care to explain why? Confidential departmental material is inside your personal case." Naomi looked at the envelope for several quiet seconds before raising her eyes to meet his. "I cannot explain something that was never mine." Ryan gave a slow shake of his head, almost disappointed. That is usually the first answer people give. Ethan frowned. Something about the envelope seemed wrong. He remembered processing restricted evidence the previous afternoon, and he could not recall seeing that particular seal among the logged inventory. Before he could speak, Ryan continued. "I am placing this item into temporary custody pending investigation." Naomi remained perfectly composed. "You are free to follow whatever procedures you believe are appropriate." Her voice carried neither fear nor anger. If anything, she sounded quietly concerned for everyone else in the room. Ryan interpreted her calmness as resignation. "Please remain where you are while we verify a few things," he said. Naomi simply nodded. Across the lobby, two detectives exchanged uneasy glances. One whispered that the situation did not feel right, but neither stepped forward. Years of watching Ryan dominate difficult encounters had taught many people that remaining silent was often the easiest choice. Upstairs, Chief Harold Simmons pushed through the stairwell door with the sealed appointment packet still under his arm. His phone vibrated again with a message asking whether the welcoming reception had begun. He quickened his pace without realizing that the elevator had stopped one floor below him, delaying his arrival by only a few moments that would soon feel far more significant than anyone expected. Outside, 3 black city vehicles rolled into the station parking lot and parked neatly beside the entrance. Their engines switched off one after another, but the tinted windows concealed their passengers. Inside the lobby, Ryan carefully sealed the evidence envelope inside another transparent bag while completing a preliminary property form. Every signature he placed on the document strengthened his confidence that he had built an airtight case. Naomi quietly watched each step, committing every detail to memory. She noticed the time displayed above the reception desk, the names written on the property log, the camera mounted above the entrance, and the silent faces surrounding them. None of those details seemed accidental to her. She knew that truth rarely arrived with loud announcements. More often, it revealed itself through ordinary moments that people believed no one important was watching. Naomi did not reach for the evidence bag, did not argue with Ryan's accusation, and did not attempt to defend herself in front of the growing audience. Instead, she quietly shifted her attention toward the security camera mounted above the entrance, then toward the digital clock on the lobby wall before finally returning her gaze to Ryan. It was a brief sequence, almost too subtle for anyone to notice, but Ethan did. He found himself wondering why someone facing such a serious accusation appeared more interested in the room than in the allegation itself. Ryan interpreted her silence very differently. To him, it looked like surrender. He placed the sealed evidence bag on the counter with deliberate confidence and began filling out another report. Every stroke of his pen carried the certainty of someone convinced the outcome had already been decided. "This documentation will become part of the official record," he announced, making sure everyone nearby could hear him. Naomi answered with the same calm tone that had unsettled him since the moment she arrived. "Official records are valuable because they preserve facts." Ryan barely looked up. Exactly. He believed the conversation had ended in his favor. What he failed to recognize was that Naomi had chosen each word carefully. Across the lobby, one of the civilian visitors quietly whispered to another that the woman seemed remarkably composed for someone being accused of possessing restricted material. The other visitor simply shrugged, uncertain what to believe. People often trusted confidence more than evidence, especially when confidence wore a uniform. Upstairs, Chief Harold Simmons stepped out of the elevator just as his phone rang again. This time the caller was City Administrator Melissa Grant. "Have you welcomed Captain Brooks yet?" she asked. Harold stopped walking. "She should already be here," he replied, glancing toward the stairwell leading to the lobby. Melissa hesitated before answering. "The mayor's office and the command staff are less than 5 minutes away. We are expecting photographs before the official introduction." Harold felt a sudden weight settle in his chest. Without another word, he ended the call and hurried toward the stairs. Outside, the 3 black city vehicles remained parked in front of the station. Their passengers stayed inside, reviewing schedules and waiting for the signal that everything was ready. A local newspaper photographer checked the camera battery while another city employee carried a presentation folder containing the official appointment certificate. None of them realized the ceremony they expected had already taken a completely different direction. Back inside, Ethan quietly opened the digital property log on his computer. Something continued bothering him about the restricted evidence envelope Ryan had supposedly discovered. He searched the inventory records from the previous week. Every envelope issued by the Records Division carried a serial number. He typed the number visible through the transparent evidence bag. No match appeared. Ethan blinked and entered it again more carefully. Still nothing. A faint feeling of unease crept across his face. Before he could investigate further, Ryan noticed him working. "Everything all right over there?" Ryan asked. Ethan minimized the screen almost instinctively. "Yes, sir. Just finishing the morning entries." Ryan nodded, satisfied, and returned to organizing paperwork. Naomi quietly observed the exchange without saying a word. She noticed Ethan's hesitation, the unanswered phone blinking behind the reception desk, and the distant sound of several vehicle doors closing outside the station. The moment she had anticipated since accepting this assignment was drawing closer with every passing second. Around her, the department continued following familiar routines, unaware that the truth had already begun finding its way through the smallest details, the quietest observations, and the ordinary people who had finally started paying attention. Naomi had accepted the transfer to Ashcroft nearly 6 weeks earlier, long before anyone inside the department knew her name. The decision had not been announced publicly because the city wanted the transition completed quietly after an independent review revealed troubling patterns that could not be ignored any longer. Complaints had accumulated over several years, each one appearing insignificant by itself but forming a very different picture when placed together. Community trust had steadily declined. Internal reports had disappeared into filing cabinets. Several promising officers had requested transfers without explaining why. The city council wanted fresh leadership before those problems became impossible to repair. Naomi had earned a reputation across 3 counties for restoring professionalism without seeking attention. She believed that lasting change never began with dramatic speeches. It began by observing people when they believed nobody important was watching. That belief explained why she had chosen to arrive alone, driving her own car instead of joining the official welcoming party delayed by scheduling changes. She wanted her first impression of the department to be authentic rather than carefully staged. She had expected routine introductions, perhaps a few cautious conversations, and an opportunity to meet the officers before the formal ceremony. Instead, within minutes of entering the lobby, she had witnessed something far more revealing than any prepared briefing could have offered. She had watched confidence become arrogance, procedure become assumption, and silence become habit. Every decision Ryan had made since she arrived had quietly answered questions that official reports never could. She remembered the words spoken during her final meeting with the city administrator before leaving her previous assignment. "Do not judge the department by its policies," Melissa Grant had told her. "Judge it by what happens when nobody thinks leadership is present." Those words echoed in Naomi's mind as she stood in the lobby surrounded by officers who still believed they were witnessing an ordinary investigation. None of them realized they were also participating in the first leadership assessment of the department's future. Ethan continued searching the property database whenever Ryan looked away. The missing serial number refused to make sense. Every restricted evidence envelope was issued through a controlled inventory process. If the number did not exist, then the envelope should not exist either. A quiet concern settled over him, but uncertainty kept him from speaking too quickly. He needed facts before making an accusation against a senior officer. Nearby, Ryan organized his paperwork with growing satisfaction. The longer Naomi remained silent, the more convinced he became that his version of events would become the accepted one. He never noticed that the unanswered telephone behind the reception desk had started ringing again. Nor did he notice the flashing notification on the internal computer system announcing the arrival of executive visitors. Outside, the doors of the Black City vehicles finally opened. Men and women in business attire stepped onto the sidewalk carrying folders, presentation materials, and official credentials. A photographer adjusted the camera lens while another employee straightened a ceremonial banner prepared for the department's leadership transition. Inside the station, footsteps echoed from the stairwell as Chief Harold Simmons descended more quickly than anyone had ever seen before. His face carried none of the calm confidence expected on a day meant for celebration. Instead, it reflected the uneasy realization that something had gone terribly wrong before the ceremony had even begun. Naomi heard those approaching footsteps and recognized their rhythm immediately. She did not smile. She did not reveal her identity. She simply waited with the same steady patience that had guided every decision throughout her career, knowing that the truth was no longer approaching slowly. It had already reached the front door. The lobby doors opened, and every conversation stopped without anyone asking for silence. Chief Harold Simmons entered first, holding a large sealed appointment packet against his side, followed by City Administrator Melissa Grant, several command staff members, and the mayor's executive assistant carrying a presentation folder embossed with the city seal. Behind them, a local newspaper photographer lowered the camera after sensing that something unexpected had already unfolded. Harold's eyes immediately found Naomi standing quietly beside the reception counter. Then he noticed the transparent evidence bag, the open portfolio, the collection of unfinished reports, and finally Ryan standing confidently beside them. A heavy silence settled across the room. Ryan smiled politely, believing he had prevented a potential security breach before the arrival of senior officials. "Chief," he said, "good timing. We intercepted an individual carrying what appears to be restricted departmental material. I was just documenting the incident." Harold did not answer. Instead, he slowly looked toward Naomi. For a brief moment, neither of them spoke. Then Harold straightened his uniform, his voice carrying through the entire lobby with calm authority. "Captain Brooks," he said, "I sincerely apologize for the unexpected welcome." Every person in the room froze. Ryan blinked once, convinced he had misunderstood what he had just heard. Melissa Grant stepped forward holding the official appointment certificate. "Everyone," she announced, "please welcome Captain Naomi Brooks, effective immediately as the newest police captain of the Ashcroft Police Department." The word seemed to drain every sound from the building. Ethan stared at Naomi, then at the appointment certificate, before slowly looking toward the evidence bag resting on the counter. Several detectives exchanged stunned glances. One civilian visitor quietly covered his mouth in disbelief. Ryan remained perfectly still. His confident expression disappeared almost instantly, replaced by confusion as he searched Naomi's face for some sign that this was all a misunderstanding. Naomi calmly reached into the inside pocket of her blazer and produced a leather credential wallet. She opened it slowly, revealing her official city commission, command identification, and signed appointment documents. Melissa accepted the credentials with a respectful nod. Before handing them back, Harold then lifted the sealed packet he had been carrying since early that morning. The envelope still bore the unbroken city seal, confirming that Naomi had never even opened the official paperwork since arriving. Captain Brooks chose to report quietly before the formal ceremony, Harold explained. She wanted her first day to begin like any other. Ryan looked down at the evidence envelope inside the transparent bag. For the first time since the morning began, uncertainty crossed his face. His eyes moved toward the portfolio, then toward the security camera above the lobby entrance. Ethan quietly stepped closer to his computer. "Chief," he said carefully, "there is something else you need to know. I checked the inventory database. The serial number on that restricted evidence envelope does not exist in department records." No one spoke. The statement seemed to echo across the room. Melissa slowly turned toward the evidence bag. Harold's expression hardened, not with anger but with concern. Naomi remained exactly where she had been standing since arriving nearly an hour earlier. She did not celebrate. She did not accuse anyone. She simply observed every face in the room as people quietly realized that the story they thought they understood had changed completely. The department had gathered to welcome a new leader. Instead, before the ceremony had even begun, the truth had already introduced her. No one moved until Captain Naomi Brooks quietly stepped toward the reception counter and looked at the transparent evidence bag one final time. Her expression remained calm, but there was now an unmistakable sense of authority in the way she carried herself. She did not raise her voice or accuse anyone. Instead, she looked toward Chief Harold Simmons and spoke with measured precision. "Before this department welcomes new leadership, I believe we should first establish the facts." Harold nodded immediately. "Agreed." Naomi turned her attention toward the security camera mounted above the entrance. "Please preserve the entire lobby recording beginning 30 minutes before my arrival." Ethan was already reaching for the computer keyboard. "Yes, Captain." She continued without hesitation. "Secure the body camera recordings from every officer who interacted with me this morning. Preserve the digital property log. Preserve the evidence room access log. Preserve every internal communication related to this incident." Each instruction was delivered with the calm confidence of someone who had spent years allowing facts to speak louder than assumptions. Ryan stood silently beside the counter, watching the situation slip further beyond his control. Melissa Grant quietly observed the room before addressing Harold. "The city will require a complete administrative review." Harold answered with a single nod. "It starts now." Ethan quickly opened the surveillance system and replayed the lobby recording. The video showed Naomi entering the station with only her leather portfolio. It showed Ryan approaching her. It showed the conversation exactly as everyone remembered it. Then Ethan slowed the footage frame by frame. The room grew silent again. Every eye remained fixed on the monitor. The recording revealed Ryan briefly turning his body toward the open portfolio while shielding his hands from the lobby with his shoulder. A second later, the restricted evidence envelope appeared inside the portfolio before Ryan dramatically removed it. Nobody spoke. Even Ryan stared at the screen without saying a word. Ethan quietly switched to another display showing the electronic evidence inventory. "Captain," he said carefully, "the serial number still does not exist in our records." Naomi looked toward the monitor for several seconds before calmly asking another question. "Who had authorized access to restricted evidence packaging this morning?" The record supervisor checked the electronic access log. Only one employee had entered the storage cabinet before the station opened. Officer Ryan Walker. A long silence settled across the room. Harold slowly removed Ryan's incomplete incident report from the counter and compared the timestamps with the surveillance recording. The sequence no longer matched the official paperwork. Melissa looked toward the photographer waiting near the entrance. "There will be no ceremony until this review is completed." The photographer quietly lowered the camera. Naomi turned toward Ryan for the first time since her identity had been revealed. There was no anger in her eyes, only disappointment. "A police department survives because the public believes our reports reflect the truth," she said evenly. "The moment evidence becomes a tool instead of a responsibility, every honest officer pays the price." Ryan lowered his eyes. Around him, the same colleagues who had remained silent throughout the morning now looked at the floor, the walls, or the computer screens, each realizing that the greatest damage had not been caused by one decision alone but by every moment when people had chosen not to question what they knew felt wrong. Outside, the city vehicles remained waiting beneath the bright Georgia sun, but inside the station something far more important than a welcoming ceremony had already begun. Accountability had finally entered the building, and unlike any visitor that morning, it had no intention of leaving unnoticed. The review continued throughout the afternoon, but by sunset the atmosphere inside the Ashcroft Police Department no longer resembled the place Naomi Brooks had walked into that morning. Conversations were quieter, not because people were afraid, but because they had finally begun thinking carefully about every decision they made. Chief Harold Simmons signed the paperwork initiating a formal internal investigation based entirely on documented evidence, recorded video, electronic access logs, and verified department records. The findings would be handled according to policy, and every employee understood that the process would be guided by facts rather than assumptions. Ryan Walker sat alone in an interview room waiting for the administrative review to continue. For the first time in years, he had no reputation to hide behind, no confident explanation ready before the questions were asked, and no certainty that someone else would quietly overlook what had happened. The silence surrounding him felt very different from the silence that had filled the lobby earlier that morning. That silence had protected bad habits. This silence demanded accountability. Meanwhile, Naomi finally stepped into the office prepared for the department's new police captain. The room was simple, with a polished wooden desk, a large American flag standing beside the window, and shelves lined with decades of department history. She placed her leather portfolio on the desk exactly as she had carried it into the station hours before. Looking through the window, she watched officers speaking with one another outside in small groups. Some looked thoughtful. Others appeared unsettled. A few nodded respectfully as they noticed her standing there. Naomi understood that rebuilding trust would take far longer than exposing a single mistake. Policies could change in a day. Culture required people to choose differently every morning afterward. A quiet knock interrupted her thoughts. Ethan Cruz stepped into the office. "Captain," he said, "I wanted to thank you for insisting that we check every record instead of accepting the first explanation." Naomi smiled warmly. "Never thank me for following the truth. Thank yourself for refusing to ignore the details." Ethan nodded before leaving the office with renewed confidence. Later that evening, Melissa Grant addressed the department in the briefing room. She reminded every employee that public trust was earned one interaction at a time and protected only through honesty, fairness, and professionalism. Nobody applauded. They simply listened. Sometimes the strongest lessons did not require loud reactions. As the building slowly emptied, Naomi walked through the lobby one final time before locking her office for the night. She paused beneath the same security camera that had silently witnessed every moment of the morning. It had not taken sides. It had not formed opinions. It had simply preserved the truth until someone cared enough to examine it. Naomi looked toward the front doors where the last rays of sunlight stretched across the polished floor. Her first day had not unfolded the way anyone expected, yet perhaps it had revealed exactly what needed to be seen. She quietly reflected on the lesson the department would remember long after reports were filed and investigations were completed. Authority may open a door, but integrity determines who deserves to walk through it. A badge can command attention for a moment, yet character is what earns respect for a lifetime. And in the end, truth never needed the loudest voice in the room because it had always possessed the strongest one.